Zealand is known worldwide as a land of peace, beauty, and calm. But buried in its past is a war so devastating that it reshaped the entire nation. This was the Musket Wars, a conflict that raged from 1807 to 1845, long before the famous colonial battles with settlers. Unlike those wars, this was Māori against Māori, fueled by old rivalries, the pursuit of mana, the hunger for land, and the arrival of a single weapon that changed everything, the musket. Before Europeans arrived, Māori warfare was fierce but balanced. Tribes fought with taiaha, spears, and clubs. Battles were brutal but limited. Victory brought prestige, defeat brought shame. But then came the musket. Suddenly, the balance of power was shattered. A single gun could decide the fate of hundreds. Villages that had stood for generations were burned in minutes. Chiefs who secured muskets gained terrifying new power, and once the first shots were fired, the wars spread like wildfire across Aotearoa. One man symbolized this new age, Hongi Hika, the great Mpuhi chief. In 1820 he sailed all the way to England, met King George IV, and returned to New Zealand with more than 300 muskets. For his enemies, it was the start of a nightmare. Hongi led raids across the North Island, capturing, enslaving, and destroying rival tribes. Entire communities fled into forests and mountains. Those who survived scrambled to trade flax, timber, and food with Europeans in exchange for muskets of their own. Soon, everyone was armed. What began as local feuds exploded into decades of bloodshed. Historians estimate that between 20,000 and 40,000 people were killed in the Musket Wars, more than in all of New Zealand's later wars combined. To understand the scale, remember that New Zealand's population then was only a fraction of today's. Nearly every tribe felt the impact. Whole regions were emptied as survivors migrated in search of safety. Fertile lands were seized, ancient rivalries reignited, and old alliances dissolved overnight. The sound of musket fire echoed across the islands for nearly 40 years. But these wars weren't simply about weapons. They reshaped Māori society itself. Some iwi became powerful empires, while others vanished from the map. Traditional food supplies collapsed as crops were burned and storage pits destroyed. Canoes once used for trade became war machines filled with gunmen. The very structure of Māori life was rewritten by the musket's power. Yet at the same time, desperation for guns tied tribes more closely to European traders, opening the door for deeper colonial influence. By the 1830s, the violence reached its breaking point. Entire generations had grown up knowing nothing but war. Tribes were weary, numbers shattered, resources stretched thin. It wasn't peace that ended the Musket Wars, but exhaustion. And when colonization surged in the 1840s, Māori society was already fractured. The Treaty of Waitangi, signed in 1840, is remembered as the defining moment of New Zealand's history. But few realize that it came directly on the heels of the Musket Wars. Māori chiefs signed with hopes of stability after decades of chaos, but weakened by internal conflict, they had little power left to resist colonization. Land was confiscated, new wars broke out, and a new chapter began, one that is taught and remembered, while the Musket Wars quietly fade from memory. The Musket Wars killed more people than any other conflict in New Zealand's history. They redrew maps, destroyed communities, and shaped the very foundation of the country. Yet they are barely taught in schools, rarely shown in films, and almost forgotten in public memory. For most New Zealanders, the story of their land skips from first contact with Europeans straight to the colonial wars, leaving this bloody chapter in silence. But the land remembers. The rolling hills that look so peaceful today were once battlefields. Rivers that flow quietly carried war canoes filled with armed warriors. The silence of the forests hides echoes of villages burned to ash. To walk through New Zealand is to walk across ground soaked in forgotten conflict. The Musket Wars were more than a war. They were a turning point, a storm that changed the course of New Zealand forever. And though history books may gloss over them, the truth remains. Beneath the beauty and calm, this country fought a secret war, a war so vast, so brutal, that even now, most people do not talk about it.